the leading edge with Abie. Living on the leading edge with Abie. Living on the leading edge with Abie. Awesome, bruh. Welcome. Yama, thanks for coming on the show.
Yama, brother.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you, bruh. I've been really looking forward to this episode and getting you on, having a yarn with you about a whole heap of different issues and what you're passionate about and obviously, just whatever you want to talk about today, bruh. So, any chance you could give us, all the listeners, some background information on you and who you are, who's your mob, and where you grew up, and community you grew up with, and yeah.
Absolutely. So my name's Brendan MOYLE. Look, I'm currently the CEO of Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council. I was down there in Canberra for probably 2 or 3 decades and spent pretty much 20 odd years on the board of what's now Nambury Local Aboriginal Land Council. And I have to give a shout out to my elders down there who, particularly as someone that was actually getting older on Ngunnawal and Nambury country, they invested a lot of time into me. My mob was Gomeroi, Kamilaroi. My great-grandmother, though, was Murawari. She was born up on Barwon Mission, up at Bree, and then relocated down to Glar, at the old Glargambo Mission, and that's when she married in with all the bakers and the barkers and that. So my grandmother was a baker, and they went right across northern New South Wales, southeast Queensland, and ended up back in the Big M, Moree. So it ended up down the Snowy River, down around the Snowy Mountains and south coast of New South Wales, where particularly my generation and my dad's generation reside nowadays.
Yep. Cool. So I've met you since we've been. I come on State Land Council as a councillor, and you come on board as as a Darkinjung CEO of the Darkinjung Land Council. Met you up at Uncle Farf's funeral, was it? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, it's,
our Uncle Lon Munro Senior's funeral. Tell me a bit about your history within the Land Rights Network and what you've done over the years. So, like, about your mob, like, can you just give me the listeners a bit of information about where you grew up with and what you grew up doing, and I suppose we'll talk about that before we get on to where you're at now.
So, spent a fair bit of time living down the Snowy Mountains actually, with this tiny little town that had maybe 150 people, and then living in a place called Bombala for a while too. It only about 1,000 people back then. For me, been in land rights for 25 plus years now, I'm starting to show my age. My dad's been on the board of Nowra Land Council, my sister's on the board of Illawarra Land Council, my auntie's now on the board of Nowra Land Council. And it really came back to my grandmother. Before she ended up down the Snowy River, she was out at Blacktown. And, I still remember hearing stories from elders and mob that she was instrumental in fighting to get the actual sewerage on out at Blacktown. So back when she was out there, mob didn't have access to the basic utilities and stuff, and she was really fighting for it. For her, she ended up moving down the Snowy River, following one of her brothers who pretty much used to knock around with old Farfy, old Uncle Lyle. And it's been a real blessing for me, over the years, being able to spend time with our elders. Quite often now in this modern world, we forget about the journey of our ancestors and our elders and the path that they've set before us. And having time to learn from people like old Uncle Lyle Munro, even Lily Moe and Lloyd and everyone else, but down the south coast, it's growing up around down that way as well. at Uncle Benny Brown, Uncle Sonny Sims, you know, at Auntie Bertha Bloxham, Uncle Willie Bloxham, Auntie Faye Trendo. So many people. Some are still with us, but many have passed. And I was really blessed at I started the land rights movement when I was in my very early 20s, just as a member. And Auntie Matilda House and Antoinette House, who's related to all my family. Auntie Matilda spent a lot of time with me, particularly when I moved to Canberra. And, you know, hearing the stories about the Tent Embassy and where everything actually came from, and understanding and living in community and trying to do the right thing for our people, and learning those lessons from them. And I still remember one of the most profound experiences I had at, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, but I remember I was sitting with old Uncle Owen Munro down at Wollongong one day, and it was the night that Uncle Bruce passed away. And, you know, he was sitting there telling me stories about Gran and my uncles and everyone else, and we were laughing. And the next morning he was gone. He had to go back to Moree. And, you know, that was really profound for me, because I started to look around at our generation. Like, I'm almost 50 now, and this is going back a while ago, but I'd already started to actually have elders put their time and their confidence in me. But then that was really profound for me, because I started to look around. I thought to myself, you know, where are the people that are the strong voices? Where are we continuing those strong voices? Where are we continuing the fight? And people forget that pathway. People forget the fights that our elders and our ancestors have had to actually do just to give us what we have today. And, you know, I often say that the first wave of colonisation was taking the land. The second wave of colonisation was the assassination, the massacres, the assimilation of our people. The third wave of colonisation is now, which is the stealing of our identity, indoctrinating us so much that we want to be like everyone else, or white fellas stealing our identity. And I think probably the next most profound thing for me, when my daughter Taylor was born, she's 16 now, and when she was born, Auntie Matilda House came up to the hospital with me, and it's funny, I never really wanted kids, because I always thought I was a bit too wild when I was young, and had struggled when I was younger in life. And I had this little baby tucked up in one arm, and Auntie Matilda looked at me and said, "Son, how do you feel?" And I remember just holding back the tears from the emotion. I said, "Aunt, you know, my family, my dad, my grandmother, were always brought up to be fighters. Our mob, our Gomeroi Kamilaroi mob, we are fighters." But I looked at her and I said, for the first time ever, I truly understood what I was fighting for. And it's for those future generations. And for me, that comes back to what I was saying in terms of third wave of colonisation. Land rights for me, the power of land rights isn't in the legislation. That's just the way we intersect with the white world. The power of land rights sits in our people. It sits in our people through our land council network. You know, it's funny, I've got a tattoo, a land rights tattoo on my shoulder. And there's a fundamental difference for my tattoo. My tree's got roots. And I remember people saying to me about 10 years ago when I got it done, they said, "Oh, what do the roots stand for?" I said, that's our elders, that's our ancestors, that's our actual communities. Because no matter how big a tree is, if it doesn't have strong roots, it falls over. And when I look at some of the fights and the battles that like my brother Nathan Moran down at Metro, and we've been talking about for 20, 30 years, what we're now seeing now is we're trying to regenerate the strength of our land rights movement, so that we're no longer asking for authority. We're no longer asking for permission to be heard. We have a damn right to be heard, and we have the power to be heard.
Yeah, deadly, bro. Deadly. Yeah. So, you've been talking about the third wave, Aboriginality. That's obviously a big topic in our communities at the moment, with people claiming to be Aboriginal, people changing lanes halfway through life. I think it's it's become a huge issue in especially in urban areas, but it's also happening right across the state. A lot of mob have been talking about it, and there's issues. Land council's been taken over by people who've never been Aboriginal, but all of a sudden like I said, they've changed lanes halfway through life. What's your perspective on that and what's going on?
You know, it's funny. One of my elders down the south coast, Uncle Tom Slocky, about 20 years ago, he said to me, you know, Brendan, Aboriginal people have had to walk many different paths to get where we are today. And I agree with that. We've had significant atrocities. There's been stolen generation, there's been assimilation, there's been massacres. For me, though, I find it really personally insulting that people will disingenuously say that they're stolen generation. That shows no respect for the people who were stolen. It shows no respect for the people for the descendants of the people who were stolen. Earlier today, I was down at Parliament House, and I had to give evidence in terms of the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill. And one of the things that both Nathan and I talked about was the fraud. Because people are doing it for a benefit. They're doing it to generate money. Now, under the Crimes Act, and I said this to the members of the Legislative Assembly, under the Crimes Act, 1900, if you receive a benefit by deceit, that's fraud. And what we're seeing is this commoditisation of cultural identity. I mean, I'm always been respectful where people are genuinely disengaged and disconnected, but that is their journey. Finding out about an ancestor, a long lost ancestor, is not sufficient. It is up to them to not just actually identify where that long lost ancestor is, but to actually go back and reconnect with their people. And if their people choose not to actually accept them, then so be it, you're not black. Now, for me, this becomes a real issue, because what we've got is people infiltrating our communities and infiltrating our organisations. We've got people setting up their own organisations, and they're doing it for money. On the Central Coast, we have people who are making $30,000 and $40,000 a month through their organisations they've set up. Whereas if you believe what they've written, they've been white for 7 generations or 8 generations. One of the things that I said or actually wrote into Dark Ages Cultural Authority statement is that, if someone actually suddenly finds out that they've got ancestry back to the First Fleet, and they had an English ancestor come out at that point in time, they can't suddenly say, "Oh, I'm an English citizen." They can't say, I'm an expert in English law as in LORE and culture. So why is it allowed to happen to us? And so the challenge for us is that we need to show our strength in terms of how we take the task to government. And, there's a lot of things that I unpack and that I'm trying to actually look at how we mobilise our land rights movement about. Because our land rights movement was founded on identity. It was founded on survival. We've got a new wave of attack on our people, and it's the third wave of colonisation, the stealing and the colonisation of our identity. Now, one of the things that I quite often say is that, it started with the education sector, and we put in a complaint to the Independent Commission Against Corruption, saying that basically Sydney University was guilty of corrupt conduct because they were accepting self-identification to hand out benefits. And, there's been a fair bit of work to undo or to unpack that. And we're going to be starting with the next phase in terms of that work. But what we've seen as well, since the introduction of the Indigenous procurement policy at the federal level, now the Aboriginal procurement policy, it's become even more commoditised to be an Aboriginal person. So when you go back to the history of the Indigenous procurement policy, it was based on the principles of trickle-down economics. So Boyd Hunter, who worked for CAPA, the Centre of Aboriginal Policy and Economic Research at the ANU, wrote a paper back in, I think it was 2012, 2013. And what he found is that Aboriginal organisations are between 30 and 100 times more likely to employ Aboriginal people. the principle of that is actually absolutely spot on. Government then turned around and said, well, hang on 2 seconds, how do we use the billions of dollars that we procure, how do we use that to help grow the Aboriginal economy? So they created what was called the Indigenous Procurement Policy. Now, so the principles were that if they funnel 3% of their total revenue through to these Aboriginal organisations, those Aboriginal organisations are actually going to go out and employ Aboriginal people. They're going to be 30 to 100 times more likely to employ local mob.
Mm.
Now, at that time, the amount of people coming out of the woodwork, and we see in the narrative that people say, oh, I found out when I was 44 or 45 about my Aboriginality. I keep going, no, you found out you had an Aboriginal ancestor, and even then it hasn't been tested. Mm. But suddenly these people are becoming business leaders and speaking with authority on behalf of our people. I remember there was one guy that's down in Canberra, I mean, I used to have run-ins with because he was a bit of a redneck, shit his mouth off. And he came up to me after the IPP, the Indigenous Procurement Policy, was announced, and he's gone, guess what? I'm a Wiradjuri. And I'm looking at him, I go, and I knew exactly what he was trying to say. I said, Wiradjuri? I haven't heard of that. Where's that from? He said, oh, the biggest nation in New South Wales. I'll show you on the ATSIS map. I said, you mean Wiradjuri? Yeah, that. Now, never been through the Wiradjuri community that he's claiming to be part of. Never been through that, but he's happy to try and commoditise and say, hey, I'm an Aboriginal person because I want a competitive advantage, because as a white person, I'm not making enough money. Mm. Now, for me, government usually intersects with things when there is a failure in the marketplace or there's a failure in the market. The Indigenous Procurement Policy is because there was a failure in the market. There wasn't many Aboriginal organisations getting businesses and work. And now we hear about black cladding, and black cladding is a real issue.
Yeah.
That's where, you've got an Aboriginal person basically selling the cultural identity for a white person to make a lot of money. Mm. We've also got this fake Aboriginality as well. And when you look at the statistics, so under the Indigenous Procurement Policy, I mean, I looked at it about a month ago. The federal government now says that $5.3 billion has gone out the door since 2015. $5.3 billion. If it was really based on, and I know it was because I was there at the time, if it was really delivering for our people, how come when we drive back to Moree or Queanbeyan or Nowra, we see the same mob? Actually, their lives aren't getting better, it's getting worse. Mm. How come when we look at Closing the Gap and government's performance reports there on Closing the Gap, we don't see any improvement in Aboriginal employment, Aboriginal income statistics? We don't see any improvement in terms of Aboriginal home ownership. Mm. So where's all this money going? Mm. And that's one of the big questions we've got. And this is where, for me, I often talk about it being the third wave of colonisation, being the colonising of our identity. Mm. Under the census, with the last census, our population apparently grew by 25%. Mm. Now, our birth rates aren't that high. Mm. I mean, a lot of us out there like a dory, but our birth rates aren't that high. Yeah. So the only way that it can be summed up is because people are self-identifying. Yeah. And when I was working in government, part of the challenge that I saw was that people are really proud they find heritage, but they've usually lived with higher education standards, they've got multiple investment properties, they've got all of these things. Mm. I've had people openly say to me, oh, look, well, I found out that 4 generations ago, I'm an Aboriginal person because this person 4 generations ago. They never prove it. Mm. But what happens is, because they're coming with higher levels of wealth and everything else in education, they're pulling the stats up. Mm. And this is one of the things that, for me, with land rights, and I used to be a board member on the ALS and former chair of the ALS here in New South Wales ACT. I'm on the board for Aboriginal housing providers. I go out and in the communities that we live and we breathe and we're part of, and life's getting harder, it's getting worse for our mob. But the statistics and the money is going out the door.
So what do you think the answer is to the black cladding? What needs to happen?
So I think blackleading, to be honest with you, I think there needs to be a resurgence in terms of the way that we look at the three-part definition. I don't think the three-part definition needs to change. A lot of people don't realise that, and what I was always told and taught was that, go back to the old NAC, the National Aborigines Conference, well and truly prior to ATSIC. Give a shout out to our elders who were part of it. Uncle Lyle, Senior, Farfy, he was the chair of it for a while. Uncle Ozzie Cruz, people that were the forefront.
Uncle Bill Smith.
Yep, Werrigan. Yep.
My mum's brother, Uncle George Griffiths, Uncle Griffo.
Yep. And it's funny. Sorry,
that's how I'm in this as well. I grew up in the struggle and with the elders like that on my dad's side and my mum's side. So it's like we've got this. I don't know. Would you call us land rights kids? We're land rights babies. We grew up in it with that. These seeds have been planted in us. We've grown up with these conversations around the table. People coming around and yarning about black, how we're going to get to Sydney, how we're going to get down there for that march, or what are we going to do? How do we do this? How do we do that?
Absolutely.
I remember those just as a kid walking around and getting hunted away from the table.
Yeah.
When they were all having yarns and no kids allowed around the table.
And this is the thing. I mean, we've grown up in land rights, and people forget that land rights isn't just about land and title. It's actually about identity. It's about who we are. It's about our survival. Under Section 52 of the Land Rights Act, we as local Aboriginal land councils have, short of say, native title with its determination, we are the cultural authorities. We're responsible for actually representing the rights and interests of Aboriginal people in our areas.
Yeah.
Section 106 of the Act, municipal has that same right and that same obligation. But it's funny, I think so many Gabars seem to think that land rights is about land title. It's about money. That's part of it, but it's not all of it. It's about self-determination. And when you understand, so where the three-part definition came from, the NAC was the ones who were actually working on it.
Yeah.
In 1981, they actually came forward to the Fraser government, and they presented it. In 1981, the Fraser cabinet actually agreed the three-part definition.
Yeah.
Now, the stories I heard was that where it originally came from was that we were tired, our communities were tired of being defined by non-Indigenous people and non-Indigenous government entities.
Yeah.
Then in 1983, the Land Rights Act enshrined it here in New South Wales. And for anyone that's listening, that pretty much all mob know, but anyone else that's listening, that you've got to be an Aboriginal person. You've got to have heritage.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to prove your heritage. Then you've got to willingly identify yourself, and then you've got to be accepted.
Yeah.
Now, where it gets real interesting is that
there's an old photo of NAC. That's
Yep.
my mum's brother at the front there on the right.
Oh, true, brother.
Uncle Griffo, it's her oldest brother.
Yep.
Old Farf's up in there too.
I can
Uncle
see
Henry Bolt there from up Cabo.
Yep.
A lot of the old, I think the Bush Queen's there as well.
Yeah. So these are things for me, I get a bit welled up. But, we lived around and particularly in a tiny little part of the country where there was pretty much the Bakers and the Clarks. The Clarks came up from Framingham.
Yeah.
There was only really two families, and the families kind of stuck together because they knew that they were the only black families in a predominantly white area.
Yeah.
We didn't have much of a community down there, but it was going back to the coast. It was going back to Moree that helped that there. But a lot of people don't realise that three-part definition. So under the legal framework, the basis of our ICAC complaint was that absolutely people have to provide a confirmation of Aboriginality, but it has to be from an entity that has the legitimate cultural authority.
Yeah.
And so with Mabo 2, that underpins native title, Justice Brennan made the determination, and the third part has to be from a group with relevant cultural authority for the group being claimed. So if you want to say, I'm a Kamilaroi or Gomeroi man, you've got to be able to have that tested by Kamilaroi or Gomeroi people. And it's funny, like today I said to the people at the parliamentary inquiry, imagine how much offence it would cause if a German person or someone from German ancestry suddenly said, I'm Jewish, I'm going to do all this cultural stuff on Jewish people. I said, that's the same. I said, I don't mean to cause offence by it, but that's the same as what we're seeing with this cultural fraud, where people are coming out of the woodwork. They're not testing them. They're not being tested by people or communities or the community organisations that have legitimate cultural authority. Our land councils provide a system to do that, and we need to actually have a conversation about how we do that.
Yeah.
But the other thing is too, though, I mean, when I was in Canberra, and I've seen it in Sydney as well, I remember this one lad turned up, and he was all offended because they wouldn't accept. He signed a stat deck, and now I have an aversion to sign a stat deck saying you're an Aboriginal person. But the gubbars that were in the government agency I was in refused to accept his stat deck. Good on them for that. But the only reason they refused to accept it was because he said, we suspect my great-great-grandmother was Fanny Cochrane Smith's illegitimate child. So there was no proof. It was just suspecting that 4 or 5 generations ago. Then when he come and met with me, he looked at me and said, but people say I look Aboriginal. And I looked at him and I said, you go back 5 generations ago. You've got 50 or 60 ancestors at that. And one of them you suspect was an Aboriginal person. And suddenly you look Aboriginal? How does that work? But this is the thing is, though, that we've got this woke society. And, you know, it's been commoditised. Government wants to pump money out the door. They're not looking at the outcomes that are actually being delivered from that. They're not looking at the intent with the Indigenous procurement policy. They advertise, oh, we've got $5.3 billion out the door. Everyone goes, oh, that's fantastic. You know, they want to have their Aboriginal employment targets. So if they let people self-identify as an Aboriginal person, their employment statistics look better. You look at the educational institutions, you look at the universities. Every Aboriginal student they get coming through, they get additional funding for and support for. So there's now this, as part of this third wave of colonisation, there's been this creation of a new economy on Aboriginal identity. And, you know, I've always been a firm believer, you don't have to have grown up on a mission. You don't have to have done those things. I reflect back on what Uncle Tom said to me. Our mob have walked many different paths. You know, and we've got to respect that. But respect doesn't mean we allow absolute abject fraud.
Yeah, no, totally agree. What else is, like, you obviously talk with elders and community leaders and in regards to Aboriginality. What is their consensus in regards to this?
Look, I think there's a growing concern. It's been something that everyone's been talking about real quietly. But the problem is, though, we don't control the systems that enable it. Quite often, and you know, I note Susie Ingram has written into various press articles as well. What happens is people rise up through the ranks. They're going to protect their interests any way they can, whether it be businesses, whether it be jobs. So, and quite often within government, I'll be straight with you as well, they talk about diversity. What they want is diversity of a number. They don't want diversity of thought. And so quite often, well, not quite often, but far too often, we end up with people who are exercising what they're perceiving as their rights as Aboriginal people who have never lived or breathed as Aboriginal people. I remember when I was in government that, you know, I held a policy round table about Aboriginal housing. One of the Johnny-come-latelys, one of the box tickers, sat there. I said, 4 generations since actively identified, by own admission, owns their own home, had 3 investment properties, and then was sitting there trying to give their opinion on what the needs of Aboriginal communities that need housing are. Now, gubbars in government and senior officials will quite often listen to them because they walk like them, they talk like them, they sound like them. To be honest with you, they are them. And what they're not doing is, so they're taking that because it's more palatable. And so they're taking policy advice on things that are critical to our people from people who have no idea whatsoever.
Yeah.
I often say that, you know, when you're talking about lawyers, right, I use this as a bit of an analogy for how I describe Aboriginality. I said, you know, if you're charged right? You're going to want to make sure you've got a lawyer, and you want to make sure you're a bloody good lawyer in the area that you need, right?
Yeah.
If it's criminal law, you're going to want to make sure you've got a good criminal lawyer. If you've got family law, you're going to want to make sure you go through someone that's a good family lawyer. Now, having a law degree alone is not enough to be a lawyer. Just like having an Aboriginal ancestor alone is not enough to be an Aboriginal person.
Yeah.
The second part that you need to meet, you need to actually study for your practicing certificate. So that is you actually going out and saying, you know what, I've built the knowledge, I am ready to be a lawyer. The same way as if you've got heritage, you need to actually grow up and understand what it is to be a blackfella. You need to understand what it means to be an Aboriginal person. And that second component is where we say, you know, I identify myself as an Aboriginal person to the community. And the third part, when you look at the law, at lawyers, they get accepted and admitted to the bar. That's other lawyers going, you know what, yes, we accept you as a lawyer. The same way as our communities have the rights to accept us as Aboriginal people. And it's funny because when you explain that to Goers, they kind of go, oh yeah, I get that. But when you're talking just about Aboriginality, it seems like this blindfold goes over them. They don't understand.
Yeah.
It's funny. I remember I put up a social media post and I was talking to some of the ministers and stuff about it, because we've got these ones down around the Central Coast and northern beaches of Sydney that all claim they're Bungarees, they direct bloodline descendants. None of them have ever actually proven it. They've never actually withstood the test in terms of land rights, as registered Aboriginal owners or as native title. But they create this fake news. It's something like Donald Trump's out there.
Yeah.
You know, if they say it enough, they get enough radical Goers get behind them, and it creates this false narrative.
Yeah.
But I remember saying to these to a couple of ministers, they were asking me about it, and I said, you know, do you guys know much about Harry Potter? And they said, oh yeah, our kids watch it. I said, good, so do mine. I said, you know, in Harry Potter, a mudblood is a wizard that doesn't have wizarding parents or grandparents. And they're going, yeah. I said, so these people are like Aboriginal versions of mudbloods. They didn't have Aboriginal parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-parents. But suddenly, magically, they're Aboriginal.
Yeah.
I said, it's just like being an Aboriginal mudblood. And they started laughing. I said, it gets better. I said, you know, when Harry was attacked as a little baby by Voldemort, Tummy left with the scar, he said he suddenly got some of Voldemort's powers. He could speak to snakes. And they're trying to hold back the laughter. And they said, yeah. I said, well, if you believe their story, some of these people, you know, they haven't been black in 3, 4, 5, actually 5, 6, 7, 8 generations. Yet magically they find some photos and a couple of old birth certificates, and within 6 months they're experts on law as an LORE, culture and language. When we, who have connections to communities, who've lived in communities, who continue to live in communities, they've got knowledge that we don't seem to have. So how does that work? And they've looked at me and they've gone, actually, that's a really good point. I said, well, if you believe their stories, it's about as magical as bloody Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And at that point, they all cracked up laughing. I said, but this is the reality. The claims that are being made sometimes, and the fact that officials and people with power and authority to distribute wealth, to distribute programs, to give scholarships, to give contracts worth millions of dollars, they're the ones who are giving these people the power. So we need to take that power back and say, well, no, Aboriginal people are the ones who define Aboriginal people.
Well, the Land Rights Network, isn't it?
Absolutely.
When you look at it, like historically, the network has come from our people who were actually oppressed at the time, and from marching on the streets all the way, and we end up getting legislation in '83, and then from there we've gone the democratic path of being voted in. I can only speak as a councillor. They get voted in to these positions by the community and endorsed by the community. Our CEOs are endorsed by our communities to run our land councils. So, in turns, how do they justify themselves with their own Aboriginal organisations? That's pretty easy. You go and register with whoever, some sort of authority to register your own company, and then all of a sudden you're a spokesperson. But so it's kind of like what you're saying is actually true. Like, how did those people have some sort of right to even speak to people who are running land councils, people who are on boards of land councils, people who are part of the network. It's really there's really no endorsement from the real Aboriginal community.
No.
Whereas, like you're saying, land rights has been there since day dot, from the 200 years plus all the way through. It's always been a part of our history as Aboriginal people. We've had different things happen along the way, changes of the names and stuff like that, NAC, land rights, ATSIC and all that, but it's still been our community that's been running all these things and engaged with controlling these organisations.
Well, and you're right, brother. What worries me is that when you look at like the CATSI Act, the Corporations Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Act, the majority of members and the majority of directors have to be an Aboriginal person, but they're not testing. Even their current policy says, okay, yes, they have to have a confirmation of Aboriginality, but the registrar can determine whether or not someone's Aboriginal. That doesn't meet the three-part definition. It doesn't meet the common law determinations that are now enshrined in legal proceedings. Like I said, you've got Mabo 2 that spelled it out. Then you've got Gibbs versus Capel in 1995. Then you've actually got Shaw versus Wolf in 98. Now, those last two actually talked about, and the Chief Justices actually found that having a distant Aboriginal ancestor alone is unlikely to meet the legislative requirements to be an Aboriginal person.
Yeah.
Then you go back to last year, 2021, where the federal government had another case where a New Zealander claimed he was Aboriginal because he didn't want to get deported. The case was Helmbright over in West Australia. And, you know, what Helmbright did was he said, well, 5 generations ago I was Aboriginal. The court agreed with it. But living in West Australia, growing up in New Zealand, he produced a confirmation of Aboriginality from an organisation in Tasmania. So that, you know, the law that was applied by the government actually overturned it and threw out, basically ripped it up and said, no, that's not sufficient because we don't believe that the entity that gave you confirmation of Aboriginality has appropriate cultural authority for the group being claimed. Now, this is where, for me, it comes back down to the power and strength of land rights. But we've got a few challenges, though. I mean, you look at the voice. Do I think we actually need to have some say over government? Absolutely. Because there is no accountability at this point in time. You know, it's and I've got major issues in terms of how the voice will actually be heard if it gets up. Now, when you look at the voice, they're talking about, you know, it's going to be democratically elected and it's there to advise government. You know, we have rights, we have powers, we have ancestral connections. One of my elders once said to me that every time I walk through the door, she said, you know, I can see it's like 1,000 generations your ancestors are walking through, and that's what I've been brought up to do. That's what my elders brought me up to do, to be fearless, to walk through and recognise the fact we've got thousands of generations walking through that door with us. We should not be scared. We should not be fearful. And I hope I always exude that. But what we now have is, firstly, with the voice, does it actually give the accountability where we can actually hold government to account?
No.
I don't think it does. Because government can turn around and say, you know, we don't like what you said, so we're going to ignore it. Have a look at when the Uluru Statement from the Heart was first brought in. Now, I'm not saying I'm a supporter one way or the other, but, you know, it was presented to Malcolm Turnbull as the Prime Minister. And they'd spent like $9 or $10 million saying, okay, community, we want Aboriginal community, we want to hear what you've got to say. The Aboriginal community turned up, rightly or wrongly, the people who were behind the voice, and said, this is what came out. The Prime Minister looked and said, well, thanks, but we don't like what you've said, so we're going to do constitutional recognition because that's what we feel comfortable with, even though you've explicitly said that you don't want it. This is the problem is, the voice, the first step is, do we have power and authority over government, to hold government legitimately to account? I don't know yet. The second component of it is, and this is where for me the Aboriginality issue comes in, who's got the right to vote? Because if we've got 25 or 30% of people under the census saying, hey, they're Aboriginal, but the reality is they're not. They don't meet the legal construct. They're not attached to a proper community. They're not recognised as an Aboriginal person. That's 25 to 30% of the voice that's actually not representing our interests and our needs. And you go back to the old ATSIC elections. You know, the issues with, like I said, with Gibbs versus Capewell in 1995 and Shaw versus Wolf in 98 was about the ATSIC elections, because people coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, I found out I've got some ancestor and now I want to run for ATSIC. You know, what checks and balances are being put in place to make sure that the people who are actually running and the people who are voting are actually people who have the cultural authority and legitimacy. Because those people ultimately, if a voice goes ahead, they're meant to be representing us. And how is that potentially going to duplicate? I mean, look, I do think that in land rights we've got some really big challenges and issues. I think, you know, we need to remobilise our base. Our true strength comes from our people, not from the legislation, not from non-Indigenous staff working in our organisations. The true power comes from our grassroots movements. When you look at those old photos, and you saw, I mean, one of my favourite photos I showed you guys a little while ago, there's old Uncle old Farfy and Uncle Solly. And sorry, I get emotional every time I think about them, because they both meant a lot to me. And, you know, Uncle Solly's staring down, he's got the afro and he's staring them down at the front of the Land Rights Now sign. And, you know, for me, that's where it started from. It was a show of strength. We were tired of not being heard, so we took the power. Actually, we took our power back. And what worries me is that, you know, unless we can mobilise our people, our power is going to be diluted, because you've got people who want to hear a more moderate voice. And the more moderate voices, not all the time, but quite often those more moderate voices are the ones who are claiming Aboriginality but have not met the legal tests for them. And they've got their own interests. They want to get the jobs. They want the kids to get scholarships. They want, you know, they want to have their businesses thrive. You know, I don't begrudge anyone for wanting to be wealthy, but don't do it off the back of black suffering.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. Well, no, it's definitely an issue that we've our people have been going through the last, at least I reckon, 20 years. I remember there's people in this community here, my community, who've all of a sudden just changed lanes and stood up and said, we're this, we're our ancestors are the queen of the local tribe. And
we never had queens or kings.
Well, this is
those king plates, and this is what I keep saying to people, those king plates were a colonial sign to dismantle our traditional governance structures.
100%. Well, that's what we were dealing with. I remember 20 years ago at one of the local land councils here, and I remember some of the community, because our mob have big hearts too. Oh yeah, let's welcome them in, but I actually resigned that week after they actually became members. They accepted them as members. But these non-Aboriginal people turned on the community and said, you have to do what we say. And this was at the Land Council meeting. Everyone blew up and said, who the hell do you think yous are? And then they ended up, the mob run them out of the meeting, and they never come back. But those same people are actually out there doing site surveys now, and they're earning big dollars. And as we know, they don't need to register. They just register with that. I think it's OEH.
As a registered Aboriginal party.
As a registered Aboriginal party, and now they're making big dollars on all these new developments all over the.
Well, this is part of where the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill that I was given evidence at this morning. You know, and a huge shout out to my brothers and sisters down at Metro, because they're on the same path as us, and we stood united and said no. You know, the Cultural Heritage Bill needs to only recognise local cultural authority either sits where there has been a native title claim that has been determined. There are registered Aboriginal owners that have gone through the process under the Land Rights Act or local land council to stop the people from illegitimately coming out of the woodwork and claiming. We've got the same thing. I mean, our creation story is beyond me, yet I'm hearing all these stories, I'm reading these reports about some of these box tickers coming out of the woodwork claiming they're Bungaree descendants, recreating the narrative I read a report that someone had actually said that the rainbow serpent was the creator. You know, the rainbow serpent absolutely is part of our dreaming, but our creator and our creation story was Biami. And not just through oral history, through our oral traditions, but on the Central Coast we've got sites that are 10, 15, 20,000 years old. Out near Singleton you've got the Biami Cave. The colonists, the first invaders, came out and documented the stories of Biami. Yet here are these people trying to legitimise their claims so they can make a lot of money. Suddenly trying to recreate, and it distills it. I find it really culturally offensive. The same way as for me when people say, "Oh, I'm part of Stolen Generation." I mean, I remember when I was in Canberra, there was someone who reckoned they were Torres Strait Islander descent that reckoned they were part of Stolen Generation. And when I spoke to Torres Strait Islanders, they said there was no Stolen Generation on the Torres Strait Islands. So how disgusting is that? That's like walking up to someone and saying, a German person walking up to a Jewish person, again, no offence, saying, I'm a Holocaust survivor. You know, if that happened, the white community being up in arms, but they allow it to happen and they give these people power over legitimate community.
It's an interesting time at the moment, and I think that we need to. There's no time where we haven't had to stand together, but this time now we really need to stand together, and we really need to keep an eye on who we're accepting as being Aboriginal in our communities, because we know it's money. It's all about money with a lot of these people, and money motivated, and it's motivating people changing their historical who they are as family members, and a lot of their families don't actually even identify.
No.
But you've got some family members that are saying they are, and I get really suspicious straight away, and I think, man, how do you stand up and say you're Aboriginal, but your sister's saying she isn't?
She isn't.
So it's like, to be honest, I think that 80% of Australians have an ancestor, an Aboriginal ancestor. But in saying that, I don't claim it. I don't recognise them as Aboriginal people. You may have an ancestor, but you're not Aboriginal. That's what I've said to a few mates of mine. Yeah, you can say, but I know it's all about money. And I've got a mate who reaches out to me every now and again. Can you get me some sort of... He sends me a text message. And I said, what do you need an Aboriginality form for? And he said, I'm trying to get work for my business. It's a big part of the procurement. He's got a carpentry business, and I just leave him on red. I say, you're disrespectful, mate. Stop it. Don't message me anymore.
That's the first question I ask when someone comes to me and says, I need to get my piece of paper. I look and go, why do you want it? Can I say, I remember about 25, almost 25 years ago, my dad wrote in just an editorial into the Courier Mail with exactly the point you were talking about. He was lamenting back then, because back then it was at a point in time where every Australian was, well, not every Australian, but so many Australians were trying to find that they had some ancestral link to the First Fleet. And he actually said, and my dad wrote into the Courier Mail and said that what we'll see in the next 15 to 20 years is people now coming out of the woodwork saying that they've all got acknowledged an Aboriginal ancestor. But the problem, and that's why I quite often use the analogy that just because you find out you've got an ancestor that might be English from the First Fleet doesn't mean you're an English citizen.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you've got any power or authority in that regard.
Yeah.
But it's something that we need to take back.
Yeah.
And, there are going to be, I keep saying to people, you can't make an omelette without cracking a few eggs.
Yeah.
Where people are involved in deliberate and targeted fraud, and you look at some of the stuff that's actually happened. Just recently, Dark Emu Exposed has written up some articles in terms of Dennis Foley and Jacqueline Troy. Now I'm not an anthropologist, but certainly the body of evidence that's been put forward in that, and the level of research into those two people, they're both people who are claiming and have made a lot of money off being Aboriginal academics and Aboriginal business people.
Can they be charged for that?
Well, this is the problem, is that there needs to be an entity that actually takes them on. And, you know, for me, that's where land rights should be sitting. We should be collectively taking them on. And this is one of the things that I wanted to do, if I ended up where I always wanted to, was that we could actually take a forceful stand on this and create the legal precedents. So, you know what, no, here are people we can prove legally have been defrauding public funds, claiming it, and, you know,
Taxpayers' money.
Taxpayer money, but actually going after them, because what they've also done is they've delegitimised Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities. They're diluting Aboriginal creation stories and bloodlines, and delegitimising. And so to take the stand through civil proceedings, but then using the power through Capo to actually lobby government to say, you know, this is the quantum of funding that these people have taken. This is serious fraud. And have them prosecuted, have them charged, have them prosecuted, and have them convicted.
Yeah.
Because that way, the only way that this will start to turn is now some of these people realise you're going to lose everything and you're going to go to jail if you're actually committing fraud. Because it's not just cultural fraud, it is fraud. They're receiving a benefit by deceit.
Yeah. And I think that, when the early first fleet came out, it was mostly all men. So they had to look for women, the white convicts, when they got here. And that's why I think that people do have Aboriginal ancestors, but it doesn't make you Aboriginal. Well, if you haven't grown up as a black fella, you don't know what it's like to be oppressed in this country. You don't know what it's like not to get into nightclubs. You don't know what it's like to get money dropped into your hand and people not wanting to touch you and, oh, no, this shop's closed. You're not allowed, oh, no, you can't get into this restaurant.
Exactly.
No, we're all full. We've got bookings. But this is just normal day, run-of-the-mill things that our community actually go through. And this is an everyday occurrence in Australia. I think Eddie Betts spoke about how he was asked to be removed, I think it was from a pool with his daughter. With his little daughter, and two, I think it was in the news yesterday about all the things that him and other high profile AFL players are going through at the moment, and they're only just starting to come out with it. And I think it's because of the what's happening now, and it's more acceptable to be Aboriginal and to be able to talk about these issues of oppression without actually getting repercussions put back on you, like. We look at things like it's the likes of Anthony Mundine that have stood up, and Latrell and Tamana and all that in regards to making a stand. Now, they were persecuted, Chock and T, over the racism stuff, but I don't think these people are actually realise the hurts and that it's caused a lot of our people. And the trauma, and it's all a part of the closing the gap. I think it's stress. I think there's so many different issues that our people have gone through that actually affects our health, and it's why our people are in these positions, because of they've gone through oppression, and a lot of these people have never ever experienced any of this stuff.
And the problem is, what they do is they claim that they are then being oppressed by us, and that it's lateral violence. You know, when I was in government, part of the issue was the amount of people that would come through the woodwork and say, oh, well, if you question and said, who's your mob, where are you from? And if you started digging on that, that's the standard question. You walk into any community, people go, hey, who are you, where are you from? And you connect the dots. Brother, and I remember passing you over the years, because as you know, I mean, I wasn't ultra close with your dad, but I knew your dad through land rights. Yeah. And, you know, the first time we really got to meet each other was at Uncle Wiles funeral, Uncle Far's funeral, when we were up there with Chop. Yeah. And, you know, straight away, okay, here's your mob. And you can put it together straight away. Yeah. That's our way.
And it's not an offensive question.
No.
It's just how do we position each other in the community, and where do you fit? Oh, that's why you're sitting over there with all them. Oh, you're related to them. And, well, you sit over there because it's like sitting around the campfire where you're sitting on the border ground. You're sitting with your mob, your families, all the different families in traditional times. That it's a modern day way of us just connecting each other.
And this is the thing that worries me, because, you know, we're seeing our generations get fairer. I mean, my daughters are both fair. They go in the sun, they go real dark. I go real dark in the sun too. But if it wasn't for people knowing who their father was, who their grandfather was, and who their great grandmother was. You know, people, they'd be copping the same stuff. And what worries me is that so many of these legitimate ones use you can. It doesn't matter how much tea you got in, or how much milk you put in coffee, it's still coffee. They're using that to justify it because they think it's only about the colour of their skin, where it's actually about who you are.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be loud and proud. You don't have to be out there at the front line like people like you are, brother, and like Uncle Solly and all these people and our Newswalk councillors and the people in the land rights movement. You don't have to be at the front line.
No.
But you got to be known.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, which they're hiding behind that.
Yeah.
To validate. And I quite often say, like I said, the amount of times I've had, that's lateral violence. Now I'm not bound by a code of conduct. I can actually say it's only lateral violence if you are actually black. And if I don't believe you're black, it's not lateral violence.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a black fella asking someone who's saying they're a black fella whether or not you actually are.
Yeah.
That ain't lateral.
Yeah, no.
It's and you know, this is the thing is though that they get themselves in a position of power and authority and they plead down and they go, I'm being bullied, I'm being harassed. The reason I wear glasses, when I was a young kid and I was sent to a boarding school and it was pretty horrific at times. And when they realised that our families, as the surname's MOYLE, and I understand apparently my grandfather didn't really have much to do with him, but there's records in IATSIS for my grandfather, apparently he was connected to the Yorta people, but we identify with Bakers and the Barkers and Johnsons and all through there. From my grandmother's side, we're matrilineal, and that's the side we knew. When they realised that there was no white families Baker up through there, they beat the crap out of me. I had about 5 of them. I still wear glasses to this day. Now, that's, you know, they haven't experienced that. They've got no empathy for it.
No.
They want to commoditise those stories to say, hey, well, like you said with that lad that you know, oh, look, I want to get a contract because I want to make more money.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, it's about how do we lift all our people? How do we lift our communities?
Yeah. And what you were saying in regards to that tea thing, I think to myself, like, they're using that there. That's a good one, like, because we are getting fairer, our kids are getting fairer, and it doesn't matter. It is what it is. Just genetically, I don't know what it is, but we do get fairer. But that tea thing, and they say, it doesn't matter if you put milk in, it's still tea. No, it actually becomes milk.
Exactly.
You keep breeding out with different mob, you'll become milk.
Exactly.
And it's not tea anymore. It just tastes like milk. So it was good for that little thing, but at the end of the day, and it's like these generations, like 30 ancestors, non-Aboriginal ancestors, and you got one Aboriginal ancestors. Well, you're milk, as far as I'm concerned.
And this is where, with our cultural authority statement we issued for Darkinjung, I actually said, 0.5% of the world's male population can prove a DNA connection to Genghis Khan. That's 16 million people. So does that mean suddenly there's 16 million fucking Mongol emperors out there? Now, and because of the impact of that, you got people in every nation in the world who can trace some ancestral connection or DNA connection back to Genghis Khan. That does not make them Mongol emperors. That does not make them Mongol citizens.
No.
It doesn't even make them Mongol people.
No.
Yet there's this belief that, I found out that, and again, quite often these people, I'm not going to prove it. I'm just going to tell you I've got it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, because if you try to actually say, well, who is it? And then you start to dig, that's lateral violence. That's what they're claiming. Rather than actually saying, okay, and again, no disrespect, we've got families, I think all of our families have been touched by stolen generation. My family line wasn't. But we face other atrocities. But you got people who turn around and say, I'm part of stolen generation, I can't find who I am. I said, have you gone to the IATSIS family history record? Have you gone to Link Up? Oh, yes, they can't. Oh, well, you're not black. And for me, the people that are still experiencing and suffering the intergenerational trauma of stolen generation, it's so offensive when someone turns up and they try to hide behind that.
They just use it as, they hear it as a word.
Exactly.
And they found an ancestor. Oh, they must be part of the stolen generation. No, it's not stolen generation. Your ancestor chose not to be Aboriginal.
Exactly.
That means it cuts off with you.
Yep.
There's no coming back from that.
Well,
You don't have any the principles,
exactly.
characters, what we do. You're not connected to community anymore on how we deal with each other, interact with each other. There's positions in the community, in families. You're a spokesperson for your family at a certain age.
Yep.
You might be get put up at that position when you're at 19, 20 because you're the most responsible in the family. Well, they'll go, you know what? The grandmother will go, you're the one who's speaking on behalf because your father's still drunk. Mm-hmm. He's carrying on partying and still doing silly things. You're the spokesperson. You got a job. We're all eating off you, grandson. You're working and you're providing for your sisters. You're looking after your grandmother, your brothers and all that. You're you're our spokesperson, even though he might be the youngest. But it's chosen by community.
With cultural authority.
With cultural authority.
It's interesting, brother. I quite often actually throw it back, and for any of the gubbs, any of the white fellas that are actually listening to this, the reason I give examples like the lawyers and that is to help you understand. Because you talk to actual Aboriginal people in the community, they understand it straight away. But when you put it in those kind of contexts, it helps the non-Indigenous community understand.
Yeah.
One of the things I was going to say, brother, is that, I've been reading these cases, these legal cases in the news and stuff like that, where, some of these women have come out and said, I'm a cancer survivor, and they were using that to actually fraudulently create their own fitness apps and products and stuff like that, and they rate millions of dollars out of people. They've been prosecuted, but people are actually sitting there and legitimately saying, well, as a cancer sufferer, not me, but I've read the news where people have said, I've suffered cancer. Cancer's touched our family. That was so insulting to our family that these people did it. And people can understand that happens, whether it be with sexual violence, whether it be with cancer, whether it be with illness. But they don't understand the same offences created for us as Aboriginal people. When people are trying to steal our identity, but suddenly someone steals the identity of someone that's a cancer survivor, or someone that's experienced child abuse, or someone that's experienced family violence, and not to denigrate those. But if people stole that kind of narrative falsely, we've seen it in the news. They're prosecuted.
Yeah.
But it seems to be accepted, and this is why, with the strength of what we need to do within land rights, the strength of our communities, we need to get back to the heart and soul of who we actually are.
Yeah.
And this is where we went with the ICAC complaint, to take the power away from the people who are actually given the power, to give them consequences. If you want to accept and acknowledge and give someone benefits that has not legally met the definition of being an Aboriginal person, you are responsible for that. And if that means you're guilty of corruption, then you are prosecuted for that. It was funny, when I was in government, I remember having a debate, let's say that, where the department I was working in was trying to work out how to do confirmation of heritage. And I said, no, it's confirmation of Aboriginality. Confirmation of heritage just means that you found some long-lost ancestor. And they came up with a policy. And so it was basically an AMS had to do it, or you do a stat deck. And I was playing on 2.6. I've got 3 different confirmations of Aboriginality. Actually, my 4th one, which I'd love to find, because old Uncle Lyle, old Farfy, and Kenny Cope actually signed off of mine way back in the 90s and that. And for me, I'd love to find that again, just because they're both past now. But I said to them, I've got a letter saying that, introducing me as the chair of the Land Council. Yeah, it's a couple of years old now, but doesn't date. And they said, no, we wouldn't accept that. And I said, so under the Land Rights Act, we're not allowed to provide a confirmation of Aboriginality, but a letter saying that I'm a member and that I'm the chairperson, and I've been the chairperson for a decade, means nothing to you. And they said, exactly. I said, but to be a member of a land council, I have to meet the 3 parts. I have to go through the membership application. Then I have to be voted in by my members. I found it really disgusting that the people in positions of power, the non-Indigenous people that had control over the benefits, whether it be jobs and stuff like that, would be taking a stat deck from someone who says, and it will never be tested, over a letter from people saying, well, actually, you know what, no, I am, and I've been tested by my community, I've been accepted by my community. And I mean, it was lucky because I didn't have to apply for the job. I was a lot more senior than those positions. But I used that as an example. And I said, you've got people coming through, you might see them as junior within a business perspective or a government perspective. But these are people that are culturally more senior. Some people are culturally more senior than the people you're actually accepting statistics from. And that is just so disrespectful to do so.
I think it's a complete misunderstanding of our cultural hierarchies.
Absolutely.
And how we do things. Like, how do these people actually? It's their privilege because of they're coming from the dominating culture to be sitting above us, and they take advice from us, and it's kind of like it's that white supremacy at the moment. Because they're ruling our country and they have say over us, and they're actually privileging off the fact that their ancestors come here and destroyed our culture and they're privileging off that, and it's like it's really insensitive as far as I'm concerned from my perspective from what you're saying, and it's I think that we can do better. Government can do better than that too, and they need to be pointed out that. You guys are still positioning yourselves above us at all times. You're saying you want to work together, but it's always you positioning yourself above us from the voice, from all of these different new ideas and new entities. It's always us they're setting a new thing up, but they're always sitting above us.
The power and control is never handed to us. So under Closing the Gap, they talk about the fact that Priority Reform 1 is about working in partnership and having shared decision making with Aboriginal people.
Treaty. That's why they don't want to recognise us as equal people.
Exactly.
They think that they're better than us mentally.
Yep.
Why isn't there an agreement between two people?
Yep. And this is where it's interesting because I mean, like for me, my mum's Scottish. She's Scottish ancestry. I mean, so many of us are mixed bloods. Mixed blood. We have different ancestries, but we are Aboriginal people because of the last two components of the three-part definition. And that's what makes us who we are, because we're part of community. We understand community, we understand the fight, and we give back to community. What worries me, and you're absolutely spot on, is the people and the government has control over our culture still. By choosing not to apply their own laws, by choosing not to allow us, in accordance with their laws and in accordance with their common law determinations, to actually have control over identity. It's funny, if you write to a minister and say, I've got serious concerns about this person, they're not actually Aboriginal, use Bruce Pascoe as an example, the minister will write out and go, you know what, Aboriginality is a really complex issue and it's really a matter for the community. Okay, stop giving him grants then and let the community have the conversation and make the decision as to whether he is or isn't. Government says on one hand, oh, look, it's up to you guys. But then their systems and processes disempower us. But it's the same, and maybe this is a conversation for another podcast, but you look at the Aboriginal flag. The Aboriginal flag has, it's a design. And no disrespect to Harold Thomas, who Uncle Harold, who's managed it. I mean, I know some of his nieces and that. I know one of his daughters. But at what point now, for me, it's not just a design, it is part of our cultural identity. People talk about the fact there that, and here's another example of the system being stacked against us. So, copyright system meant that, Wham Clothing, who used to own Birribee Arts, took possession of the licence. Government had to bail it out. Now, Birribee Art was fined, I think it was $2.5 million for importing fake Aboriginal art. They wound themselves up like a lot of these gubbars do. One company falls over, they just resurrect it and call it a different name. Suddenly, they have control over something that is part of our cultural identity from a contemporary Aboriginal perspective. Now, government goes out and buys it and pays them God knows how many millions of dollars. So we've got gubbars making, disingenuous gubbars making extra money, again, off Aboriginal identity. And I say disingenuous gubbars because my mother is not Aboriginal. And I respect that and I love her dearly. But she wouldn't actually dream. People who are legitimately part of our people, part of our communities, they marry into our communities, wouldn't do this.
No, they understand the protocols and what's respectful and what's not respectful.
Exactly. So now, though, we've got a government who says, the flag is free for everyone to use. Everyone. Let that sink in. Within a week, we had non-Indigenous businesses putting the Aboriginal flag on hard hats and on T-shirts and everything else. Well, most of those weren't run by blackfellas, were they? So they were actually making money, profiteering the Aboriginal flag as culture, part of our identity in a contemporary context. Selling it to the most disadvantaged people and the poorest people as a cohort in Australia so they can make more money. Now we've got a government that controls the copyright. Now, if that's part of our cultural identity, and I know most of us, so many of us have got tattoos and markings and stuff now that represent an iteration of that flag. Because it's not just a design, it's part of who we are as our modern Aboriginal identity. But what we've got is, we've got a government that, have said sorry for the stolen generation, but we've got a government who historically has perpetrated some of the worst human rights violations and atrocities on Aboriginal people, now controlling who actually gets to use the flag. And saying we want it for everyone, not Aboriginal people controlling our own identity.
So what do you think in regards to, we're talking about government always thinking themselves as being superior to us, their culture being superior, they always sit above us. So we've got all legislation with different the ATSICs, the NACs, the state land councils, the Voice, they're all going to be underneath, and they can pick and choose when they want to listen to us. So do you think the answer forward for us is a treaty, where we're actually sitting side by side and respectfully making decisions together?
Real good question, brother. I think we need to do another podcast. It's I'm a supporter of treaty.
Yeah.
But we need to understand what treaty is.
Yeah.
So is treaty across the whole of the state? Is it based on Aboriginal nations? One of the questions I asked in the ACT when I was living down in Canberra, I'm a Camilla Gomeroi man living on MOYLE and Ambrie country who represents me. Now, luckily, I've built strong relationships, as many of us do. When we move to somewhere, we actually build relationships with mob. So
become part of that community, bro? Exactly,
become part of the community. Now, for me though, treaty is a complex issue that we need to unpack and understand. To be honest with you, I think the true power has to always come from our people. When I look at treaty, I think we absolutely need treaty. But every treaty with First Nations people from a Western-based society has been broken with little to no ramifications. Now, that's not saying we don't do it. We need it. But it can't be the only mechanism. And this is where, I actually think that, and one of the things that I remember saying to someone when they asked me about the Voice, I said, why the hell would I want to ask for permission to be heard when I have a right to be heard? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have mechanisms, but we shouldn't be relying exclusively on those mechanisms. And us as communities, through our own leadership, should be able to understand when we have the power and strength to actually, when we take a stand on things, we need to go back to some of those old ways, to mobilise our people, to remember what the struggle is. That's where the power actually sits.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Hey, I'm actually just starting to think treaty, just having this conversation with me and you, because we can advise ministers and all these people, but at the end of the day, they can pick and choose whether they listen to us or not.
And can I ask, here in New South Wales, what is treaty? Is it treaty compensation? Well, technically and legally, treaty in New South Wales can't be compensation because the Land Rights Act provided compensation for the dispossession of our ancestors. So I don't think we've even done a lot of work to actually map out what treaty means for us. Is treaty about servicing and improving and enhancing servicing to Aboriginal people? Absolutely, I believe it should be. But that also then flows over into the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, which the Coalition of Peaks on. So where does that start and stop? treaty, when I look at the Victorian Treaty as an example, and some of the conversations there, is treaty based on cultural connections and linkages. For me, as a Camilla Gomeroi man living on Darkinjung country, there are no Darkinjung ancestors as far as I know, or as far as being proven. We do have people who claim Darkinjung. We've got people who claim other nations, fictitious nations, which, like I go back to the Harry Potter statement, they're pretty magical. But...
Isn't it funny, like our gubbers, all of a sudden they read what... And like we laugh about it. You're a book culture black fella.
Yeah.
We torment each other, and then all of a sudden we've got non-Aboriginal people that are claiming, but they're actually thinking they don't even know these sayings that we say amongst each other. And they're actually going, oh well, that's that, and I've read it in that book. And it's like, well, that was written by a white fella.
Exactly.
And this is where their cultural identity is coming from. And all
from
us
white fellas. And to be honest with you, brother, some of the actual historical records, when it's been reviewed by the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Office, has been called a 19th century fiction. But this is the thing, though, for me, though, so what does treaty actually mean for us? And I think this is something that we need to fully understand. But on top of that too, though, one of the big questions I've often asked is, if we're looking at compensation, right, so land rights in New South Wales is compensation. It's not based on traditional ownership, because our mobs were forced around. My great-grandmother was moved from Barwon to Glar. And then my grandmother, when she was a real little girl, was moved from Mungandai down to, she was lucky that they were on the south side of the river, was moved down to MOYLE, and then moved down to Blacktown. There's all these things that have happened, but I've got a big question. I don't mean to be offensive to people, but why do we seem to let Aboriginal people who have no cultural connections to what is now New South Wales or the ACT, because we're all one mob, be part of our compensation? If we went to land rights in Northern Territory, we couldn't sign up as a member. But here, by default, and again, it's the white system, we have to give them a voice when we're talking about our culture, our heritage. And this is why I keep on saying that the power of land rights, the true power of land rights, and this is going back to the things that I was told by some of our elders. The true power of land rights has never sat in the legislation. It sits in our people. And sometimes we've got to show that power and strength.
Yep. Totally agree with you. Well, thanks so much, brother.
No, my brother, anytime.
Yeah, I'm going to get you on again, I think. And, come on here and have these conversations, bro, because a lot of our mob don't know what's going on, bro, at that political level. And someone like yourself who's been in government for so long and can actually give our viewers a bit of an update and let them know what this means to not only Aboriginal people but non-Aboriginal people who listen to the podcast. Give us an update and tell us what's going on, because people can use all these big words and all that, but at the end of the day we don't understand it, a lot of us.
Brother, I remember, because I never finished high school, right? And when I started, I was a trainee in New South Wales Housing, the old Housing Commission, which is funny because I used to be a housing tenant. And my grandmother looked at me and she said, "Bub, work out how they think, work how they talk, work out how they communicate, and you can beat them." And every day I used to turn up to work when I was in government was learning how to beat them, how to beat the system, because it's only then that we can actually win and we can actually lift our people. And always happy to be part of here, and it's but for me it's about educating our people, and it's about bringing our mob from the grassroots, from the ground, along on that journey with us. All power to you, brother, for getting this together.
Awesome, brother. Thanks for coming on the show, and your grandmother was a very wise person.
Yeah, she was.
And that's the, like you say all the time, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we obviously she was obviously a strong woman who influenced you, and your influence is right across the state, bro. I'm proud of what you do, and thanks so much, and hopefully you can come back on again soon.
Look forward to it.
Stars living in the sky well. Leave a 5-star review for living on the leading edge. Living on the leading edge, wherever you listen. Living on the leading edge, living on the leading edge,